Welcome back, folks. So this video is going to focus on installing my Megasquirt MS3 plug-and-play kit into my 1988 Ford Mustang. Now, I did have a video where I did an unboxing video to show the contents of the kit. And I believe in that video I mentioned that my plans were to start off with 2 wide bands. I think I'm going to scale that back and go with a more traditional install. Most of you buying this kit will probably come and start with just a single wideband. And I'm going to do that the way that the install instructions say to do. So later on, I may make some changes. I may do dual wide bands. I may add a fuel pressure sensor. I may start making some other changes, but I'm going to kind of keep this install based upon what the instructions, the factory instructions that come with this kit instruct you to do. So with that said, let's get into this. So we're going to get started here under the hood. Really, my first step is going to be to remove the stock mass air meter and inlet tubing. Later on down the road, we're actually going to replace that with this intake tube from an 86 to 1988 Ford Mustang. Actually, on this location here. So we can go ahead and remove the stock tube for now. The next thing we're going to have to do after that is we're going to have to run the vacuum line from the intake into the passenger compartment for the ECU. So we're going to go ahead and loosen up these clamps here. We're also going to unplug the meter. And then you can set that aside once removed. So you're going to want to take your old mass air meter harness and you want to find a nice space to carefully tuck that away. Now your next task is going to be to run your vacuum line from your intake into the actual passenger compartment to the ECU. In my case, I have a Cobra intake. I'm going to use this port here. Now this port normally runs the vacuum line down to the charcoal canister. But with the Megasquirt, that's not going to be functional, so there's really no point to keep that line intact. I'm not going to remove my charcoal canister. I'm still going to leave it there so it acts as a vent to the fuel tank. But I'm going to end up plugging this line and tucking it just in case I ever need to go back to the stock ECU setup down the road. For many of you, you may delete it, you may not have it. Just do what applies to you. Here I'm going to block that line and tuck it, and that way it's going to free up that port on the 93 Cobra intake to feed down into the inside of the passenger compartment. If you have a stock intake or any other intake, usually they do supply a port for the charcoal canister. Sometimes it's under the plenum in this section. So you want to use what is appropriate for your vehicle. So I've gone ahead and I've removed the line. I'm going to find something appropriate to plug this up, and then I'm just simply going to tuck it down here in a clean spot. I'm not going to unplug the harness, although you could, if you want to, unplug it here and pull it all the way down to the solenoid. I'm just going to leave it on top of the engine there, tucked. Now this port is open. We'll get the vacuum line that comes with the kit with Megasquirt. We're going to figure out a nice way to route that to this corner over here. Once we remove that, we're going to take the vacuum line that comes with the kit, and we're going to figure out our routing to get it from this point into that grommet in the corner to feed into the passenger compartment. So the routing I'm taking is probably going to be along the back of the firewall here, and I'll end up coming out under the intake here and looping it in there. Now the line that comes with the kit is actually quite small. It doesn't fit over the port on the 93 Cobra intake, so I'm going to have to adapt it by probably getting a different vacuum fitting and going to a larger vacuum line just to connect it to there. But I'm going to go ahead and route the line in here, and then we can get ready to send it into the interior compartment. So we've routed the line. I'm going to leave it a little long here until I get my adapter here. But essentially it runs back here, and we'll tuck this in a little nicer under the pinch weld. And I have it in the corner here where I'm going to begin to feed it through the grommet into the interior of the car. So just skipping ahead a little bit, what I ended up doing was getting a 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch vacuum adapter and using that with a 1/4 inch piece of emission tubing to connect my vacuum line to the nipple on the 93 Cobra intake. I may come back and get something a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, but this will do the job for now. Now, getting the vacuum line into the interior is probably going to be the hardest part of this. In order to do that, you really need to pull the AC blower motor out. I've already gone and started pulling the ECU out. So the panel and the ECU have been removed from the car. You're just not able to get up there and access the wiring to be able to pull that vacuum line through. Now, the best way to access the grommet to pull the vacuum line through is to remove the actual heater blower motor You have one 11mm bolt right there, and then you'll have two, I believe these are 8mm bolts right under there. Once you do that, you can drop the entire box. You can drop the entire box down this way, and you'll be able to get a straight shot at that grommet. From there, you can see that we have a straight shot at the grommet. Once you see, I already have a wire poking through. So I'm going to go ahead and feed the vacuum cable, the vacuum line through that and route it. Probably going to route it along that taped up harness there and drop it down in this corner. And after some struggling, we have managed to pull the vacuum line through. We'll pull enough to make sure we have as much slack under the inside the interior as possible. We're going to go ahead and begin to reinstall the heater box back in place to get that out of our way. Now once you're ready to hook the ECU up, it's as simple as connecting the vacuum line and the original 60-pin connector to the actual ECU. The vacuum port is in this area here, and you're going to want to tuck the ECU back up in this direction here. So we're going to go ahead after that, and we're going to get the additional connector ready before we put the ECU back up in place. Now, one thing you want to do before installing your ECU is verify that your jumpers are set correctly for the map sensor and for the O2 sensors. So according to the documentation, it indicates where exactly your jumper should be. In this case, we're going to use the internal map sensor, so we're going to have the jumper positioned as outlined there. We're also going to use the right stock location wideband. We're only going to hook up one for now. We are going to eventually switch to 2 widebands, so we'll remove the jumper at that point. But for now, we're going to get the car running with one single wideband O2 sensor, which is what most folks will be doing. Inside the ECU, at the top of the board, will be the location for the map sensor. And then down here at the bottom will be the O2 sensors. And we can see that the jumper is positioned on my right rear single location. Now before we can put the ECU back in the car where it belongs, we need to assemble the extra options connector. So this connector has 2 foldable arms that fold in when you're done. So you can choose to either install the pins that you know you need. So if you only need 1 or 2, you can install just those and then close it. Or you can go ahead and install all of them if you're not quite sure what you're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and insert them all. Really, it's as simple as sliding them in until they click. And you'll know when they're in there because they won't be able to be removed easily. So you may have to try flipping them around and such until you get them all in there. So you want to insert the pins in an orientation where they lock in. And then once you can't remove them by gently pulling out, then you know the pin is inserted correctly. You install all of them and then you can lock this in. Now as you look through the pins that come with the kit, you'll know that there are actually 2 different size pins here. There's a large one that'll go on the outside, and then a smaller pin that'll fit in the inside connectors. So you want to understand the difference, and you want to understand that the outside, the larger holes, are going to take the larger pin. Now once all the pins are installed, or you've installed as many as you need, you can go ahead and clip the inner parts of the clip over, and this will lock the wiring in place. Now your connector is ready to install. You'll need to reference this page and diagram to understand which wire goes to where, and then you want to tape or tie off the rest of them so that they don't get in the way. Now I've gone and identified the pins that I'm going to be using, and I've marked them in the harness. So I'm going to use D and E as my 2 widebands. Now during the initial setup, I'm going to use the wiring through the 60-pin connector. That's the way that this kind of has been defaulted to. So you run one single wideband, it's going to run through the factory wiring. At some point down the road, I will switch to 2 widebands. So when I do, D and E will be the pins that I use. Pin F will be the fuel pressure sensor that I'm going to install on the rail. And then finally, pin L will be my PWM output for my E-fan. And one final step before we install the ECU is we're going to take the cable that is going to run to your PC. We're going to go ahead and connect that to the connector up here on the right-hand side. The vacuum line will connect to this one here next to that. So let's get in the car and button this up. So back in the car, I've installed the wiring harness, labeled them. And I've also gone in ahead and hooked up my 1 wire that's going to run and power my E-fan. I'm using an Infinity PWM fan controller to control my contour fans. So now I'm going to go ahead and put this all back together and put the ECU back up in place. And that's it. I'm just going to lightly put that in place. I'm not going to pin it. I've got the cable coming out of the top. So that'll be used for interfacing with the laptop. That's it for here. I just need to connect the vacuum line, and now I need to install the wideband O2 sensors. I'm going to prep both of them, even though, as you remember, I'm only going to install one per the instructions, the basic instructions, which is going to wire into the main 60-pin connector here, not the additional connector harness that I put together. So here we are under the car. So obviously we need to take these original narrowband sensors out, and we're going to go ahead and install the widebands. So we're going to go ahead, I have mine, this is not really set up the way that it would be in the factory, but my O2 sensor is going to unplug here, and I'm going to unscrew from the pipe and replace it with the Bosch wideband. Now with the Bosch wideband installed, the harness is actually quite long, so I'm going to end up having to zip tie this up and out of the way. Now, depending on your setup here, I have a Maximum Motorsports K member. You're going to have to get creative in terms of where you mount this. You want to keep it away from heat. I'm not sure if I'll mount it here, or this actually seems like a nice empty area on the K member up ahead, away from the engine. So I think I'm going to end up putting it up there. But I'm going to go ahead and start wiring up the controller so that it can plug into the factory harness here. And that way I can retain the wiring up to the ECU. So I'm going to show quickly how I'm going to wire my wideband up. I realize not everyone is going to be using the same wideband controller as I, but this will be a brief overview of how I plan to use this one. I'm using a wideband controller from 14.7. This one is in fact an older Spartan 2. I know there's a Spartan 3 out right now, but this one I'm going to show real quick here. Now, my plan to integrate into the factory harness is to, what I ended up doing was buying an O2 extension. But if you want, you can always snip the pigtail off of your factory O2s. These factory ones are 3-wire, whereas this aftermarket harness is actually a 4-wire connector here. Now within the wideband harness here, this particular one here has 6 wires in here. We're only going to end up using 3 of them. 3 of them are going to connect to our factory harness, while the remaining one is going to be the O2 heater ground, and that's going to connect to our a good chassis ground point. Now the wideband I'm using is a Bosch 4.9. This plug is going to connect directly into my 14.7 wideband controller. So I've done this on the other one. I'm not going to go ahead and cut this one up here, but I'm going to kind of show some diagrams and photos, kind of giving a little bit of an insight into how I connected my widebands together. Step 1 is going to be identifying the 3 wires that you have in your factory O2 sensor wiring. There's going to be a ground wire, there's going to be a 12-volt key-on power source wire, and then there's going to be a output wire back to the ECU. Finding the 12-volt wire is easy. Simply go into the car with the key on ignition, touch one end of your meter to ground, and then touch the end to the wire until you find the 12-volt wire. This will be your key on. Your ground wire is usually black in your harness, so that should be pretty easy to identify. You can also test continuity from that wire to chassis. And then the remaining wire will be your signal out to the ECU. Now we're going to connect those 3 wires to 3 of the wires from the wideband controller. We're going to connect our 12-volt key-on power wire to the red power wire for the controller. We're going to connect the ground wire to the black wire on the controller. And then we're going to connect the remaining output wire, which is the wire that runs back to the ECU with the wideband O2 signal, to the green wire on the wideband controller. Now we do need one additional wire. The white wire in this case will be a heater ground. We're just going to run an extended piece of wire, not connecting to the factory plug, and just ground that at a good chassis ground point. There are also 2 other wires. Brown wire is a simulated narrowband output, and a blue wire, which is a indicator LED for telling us if the wideband is mounted in a spot that is either too cold or too hot. We're not going to use either of those, so we're just going to tape those up and tuck them in the harness. Now, other wideband controllers may have different needs or different methods of wiring, so you'll want to look up the documentation for those and follow those directions. So the wideband is installed. I've kind of tucked the controller up against the K member here. I've secured everything for now with zip ties. I realize zip ties will get hot and brittle and fail eventually. So when I get some time later on, I will come back in here with a more permanent solution and secure everything in place. We have the heater ground. This is running off over the K member, and I actually grounded up in the fender area here. Other than that, this is plugged in directly into the actual OEM wiring harness. So that essentially wraps up this video here. I'm going to stop at this point here. But this shows all of the necessary steps needed to install the ECU in your car and begin to wire it up. The next video I'm going to do is going to show going through the software on the laptop, installing your bass tune, upgrading your firmware, etc., and then taking you through to the first start on bass tune. But thank you very much for watching and stay tuned.